So what's the go with your head?
Yep.
Obviously last time I was here,
Yep.
we grabbed it, we pulled it off, and there was obviously rust on the valves.
Yep. So.
And then we just hammered them down.
Yeah, let's go through it. Let's have a look. So here we've got everything cleaned up. We've got the new head gasket, TRD.
Yeah.
That'll be getting Hylamard and going on. Here we have the cylinder head. So last time we saw this, it was pretty filthy. It had just come off the engine. It had rust. Basically what had happened the last time I drove the car, I didn't put a fuel additive in that I run on ethanol fuels. Any ethanol car that I run, I put a fuel additive for methanol. It's called M2 by VP Race Fuels.
Yep.
That is a castor oil-based, like a fuel additive. And basically what it does is it lubricates your valve guides, your valves, your fuel pumps, any moving part, the rings and things like that. Basically what it does is it stops the conversion of methanol over into this like gelatinous sort of medium. It absorbs moisture from the oxygen and then it just goes gelatinous. This stuff stops that. It also stops the moisture affecting the rust. Essentially, methanol cars will rust pretty much instantaneously after you've stopped using them.
Yep.
So we put this fuel additive in, it lubricates and stops all that. The last time I drove the car about 10 months ago, I ran out of fuel. Gus was near me and he had a Jerry and he mixes the M2 in his car. So the Jerry's that he keeps, he doesn't put M2 in it. So when I've put the Jerry in, I didn't put any M2 in it. So then I parked it up for about 10 months and what happened is because I didn't run the additive, my cast iron factory valve guides that I was running on a factory valve rusted. Because the engine was sitting still in one position, valves were open in different areas. Those particular valves rusted open.
Yep.
So when I went to start the car, it only had compression in one cylinder. And I thought maybe it skipped a tooth and bent valves. I'd lined up the timing marks, I confirmed that the timing was correct, and then from there, basically, I came to the assumption, I said, I think my valves are stuck open. Pulling off the rocker cover gave me a quick confirmation that my buckets were sitting low, indicating that my valves were stuck down. So we pulled the head off, and it was very simple. I just tapped the valves back in with a hammer because I knew at that point in time I'm going to a different valve. I'm going to an aftermarket oversized valve, and I'll be changing out the valve guides with a bronze valve guide.
Right, yeah.
So now it's got bronze valve guides, new valve stem seals. I've checked all my spring pressures. I've recut the seats on a new and BB CNC seat cutter. We've gone to a 1mm oversized Supertech valve and reported the cylinder head to maximize the flow to suit the oversized valve.
Nice.
So let's get it unwrapped and have a look, eh?
Yeah, for sure. So you're not too attached to the bottom ends. This is not, and we've got to make this clear, this is not the 800 horsepower bottom end. This is the old bottom end that you used to run in the car.
Yeah, so...
And this is just a temporary thing just to keep the car running.
Yes, so
until the other one's ready to go. So
this particular engine was something I built when I was an apprentice 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And the motor I haven't broken, so I've kept putting power into it until something fails. I see guys split bores in these. The worst issue that I had was it lifted the head. Basically we didn't run enough ignition timing in the tune and we're running about 32 pounds of boost, and what happened is the cylinder pressure got so high but it wasn't being converted over into usable energy, so the cylinder pressure was obviously too high. It lifted it's pushed so hard against the cylinder head that it actually pulled the thread out of the block on the back left hand corner.
Yep.
So basically what I'd done is I said, okay, I finished the tune, was spraying water out the side of the head just here, spraying water between the block and the head straight out to the firewall. We finished the tune, I took it home, pulled the head off, and as I was winding, because I thought I'd just blown a head gasket, simple.
Yeah.
So I was looking to pull a head gasket off. As I wound the stud out, the thread from the block was actually still stuck on that stud.
Yeah.
So I was like, here we go. So in the car, I drilled and tapped the block for a helicoil, put a helicoil in there. I made a custom insert tool because it happened to be on the 4A block where the thread starts very deep.
Yep.
So I made up a little custom tool on the lathe to insert the helicoil, sunk that down, new gasket, head back on, and we kept going. I've raced this car many times.
And that's this one right here.
Yeah, so you can see in this hole, the thread is up the top here.
Yeah.
That's from the helicoil tap starting up here, and if you look compared to this hole, there's nothing going on there.
Nothing there.
So if you're able to see down in the hole, which would be difficult to see on camera, you'd find that there's a coil down in the bottom of that hole.
And one more thing, I just would butt in there, one more thing we've got to make clear is you didn't tune it. This is before you started tuning.
I was still...
We won't say who was tuning it, but...
Yeah, it was my boss at the time. So my boss at the time was, he's a competent tuner, but I don't believe he understood the ins and outs and what this particular engine wanted.
Yep.
And mind you, I was also tuning on a very primitive ECU. I was tuning on a Motec M4, which is from the 80s. So very primitive ECU, very difficult to tune. Then it went to a Haltech Elite. The tune-up was easier. We managed to make more power on less boost. And now it's gone to an M-Tron KV8. So we'll have more control over the engine, which will give us more power again. So like you say, this engine is not, I consider this a slapper. It still has forged rods, still has forged pistons, it still has all good components in it.
Yeah, so we'll pick up where we left off. You're saying that was just a slapper motor?
Yeah, so I consider this now a slapper. Since the day that thread pulled out of the block, this now is just a dump. Like it's of no consequence if anything happens to the block itself, as long as I don't lose a cylinder head, a turbine, or major components. These rods are only spool rod. I'm running a Wiseco piston. The rod and piston combination when I bought it back in the day was about $1,200 for rods and pistons. Not very expensive.
Yeah.
The engine bearings in this are the cheapest King bearings you can buy. In fact, one of the shells in the main tunnel is from a second-hand engine that I pulled apart and said, that's a nice shell, because in this particular engine I went with something called full groove main bearings. So the bearings on the main that go around the crankshaft, the top side normally has a groove cut in it. I use a bearing that has a full groove. So in this particular block, the late model 4As have a tang cut in the actual caps in the block, where you can buy 2 sets of main bearings, and you basically throw out all the ones with no groove in the bearing.
The solid ones,
and you put the 2 ones in. Basically what that does is the entire time the crankshaft is spinning, it is getting fed with oil pressure from every degree. So your big ends constantly have more oil pressure up to them, but the downside to that is your oil pressure runs lower. To compensate for that, I run a thicker oil. But I don't pressure up the engines. I run a factory spring in these oil pumps, and I've never broken a set of oil pump gears, and I have revved this thing to over 10,000 RPM.
Yeah. So. And people, they do the opposite thing too. They get those solid bearings, like the solid side. Do they run full solids ever? Have you seen
No,
that?
you can't do that. Because what happens is as the crankshaft turns, a 4A shaft has something called cross drilling. So they drill through the crankshaft through the entire way, and then off that up to the pin or the big end, which is the small side of the crankshaft, there is another hole that comes from the opposite side to the counterweights down to that cross drill, and then they cross drill again on the pin. So basically, as the crankshaft rotates over, the crankshaft will have the line going through it, and as that lines up with the grooved side of the bearing, oil pressure then starts to feed in. So there's a period of time where, as the crankshaft's rotating over and the cross drill, or the cut in the bearing is actually on either side, this has changed. Aftermarket bearings fix this issue. They actually taper that groove down into the bottom bearing.
Oh, right, okay.
So you'll find on like ACL race series, they actually taper the groove down to the next 20 degrees on either side of that bearing on the bottom side. So the crankshaft feeds more oil up to the big end at that time. But basically, it doesn't rely mostly on pressure. It relies on the crankshaft's spinning speed. So as the crankshaft's actually rotating over, you're actually flicking oil from the main up to the big end. Because you can imagine, as the crankshaft spinning, it's forcing oil out from the center of it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can feed a solid 60 pounds of oil pressure to that main, then it's going to be enhanced up to the big end. If you could monitor the oil pressure at the big ends, it would be huge. But you can't, because it's a rotating crankshaft inside the block. So yeah, that's just a little thing that I've done with this particular engine, and I've had no issues with the bearings whatsoever.
And so as far as going full groove, there is a trade-off. You have to monitor your oil pressures, and you could flatten bearings. This is why we didn't do it on my engine, because we discussed it. And my engine being a street car, I wasn't prepared to pull it out,
No.
all the time.
So like you say, yeah, you're right, spot on. So what happened is we did discuss this, and basically on a street car engine that you don't want to be pulling out and pulling down constantly, you don't want to be using a bearing that's like that. In a race car, if someone said to me, this is a track only car, I'm going to be racing this 12 times a year or 6 times a year, I would say to them, okay, give it a couple of years, pull the motor down, new rings and bearings. I would not run that in a dedicated street car. This car is a different story because I have about 6 or 7 spare motors for this.
Yep.
So it doesn't matter if I really hurt a crankshaft, I have plenty spares.
Yep.
So it's all development for this, for me. So like you say, that is the trade-off. You will limit the life of your crankshaft. And if the crankshaft starts to induce a harmonic, the center main bearing is not supported by an inch thick of bearing face. Now you lose 30% of that because you have a groove cut through it.
Yeah.
So if the crankshaft starts to do this at high speed in the center, it will basically flog out the center main, and you'll notice very quickly because your oil pressure drops.
Yeah.
So if you see your oil pressure drop, your center main's gone, or a big end, but you'll hear that. A main you will not hear.
Yeah. Cool.
So a bit of diagnosis and bit of theory there.
Yeah,
but,
right.
Yeah, so this engine I consider a slapper. Still got heaps of plenty good parts in it, but we're going to be pushing this thing about over 500 horsepower this time. We'll see how she goes.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Let's have a close look at this head, eh?
Yeah, let's have a look. So I didn't really bother cleaning most of the carbon off in the ports and the chambers and things because it doesn't really bother me. I mean, it's going to be started up, it's going to get covered in carbon anyway. That's my own cylinder, it's not a customer's engine. And yeah, so we'll go through and have a look. You can see I've got paper in here. This is one of the ways I transport cylinder heads. If I supply back a customer with a cylinder head, I'll always put paper in here with the camshaft separate, because I have had it where you give it to the customer, camshaft's bolted down, these valves and these valves here are open, they put it straight onto the back seat of their car, into the boot, bends the valves. It's not very hard to bend a 5mm shaft.
Yep.
So the second reason, when they unbolt the cams, if you don't do it in the right way, in the sequence, with high lift camshafts, you can snap the camshaft. So to protect myself and the customer, I supply the head like this. All the valves are shut. There's no way you're going to bend them. You can put this down on its face, which is not recommended, and it won't bend a valve. And when I hand them their camshafts, they're an individual shaft. They're not in 2 pieces. So I say to them, here's your camshafts. Don't come back to me when they're cracked in half, because when they bolt them down into the cylinder head, again, if you don't do them in the correct order, you will snap the camshafts.
Yeah.
So it's 2 methods of protection for myself. So this is how I transport them. Not to mention the fact that if I turn this upside down, my buckets can't come out.
They can't fall.
Holds
Yeah.
all the shims in the right spot.
Yeah.
This has been shimmed. You can sort of see some writing on here. That's my tolerances that I've set for this one.
Yep.
I've set these a little bit looser because than I normally would, by a few thousandths of an inch, and that's purely for the fact that it is running big boost and going to be making a lot of heat.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll have a look at the bottom. So
Brand new valves.
brand new valves, Supertech 1mm oversize. Nothing special.
And you've also, it's a ported head too, isn't it? So
Yes. Yeah, so I ported this when I was an apprentice. It was probably one of the first cylinder heads I ported. So she's not that special. And I've definitely gained a hell of a lot more skills since I started.
Since then, yeah.
Yeah, so the exhaust solid's a bit more important on this particular one. So again, like you say, there's still carbon in here. I wasn't worried about cleaning off too much because as soon as I started, it's going to be carboned up. So, but yeah, I tend to polish to a high surface finish on the exhaust and intakes. Some people think that a rough surface is better because air travels faster over air, and there's all these theories out there. Realistically, at the end of the day, it's, to me, injecting fuel into a port that has a rough surface. Fuel is more likely to stick to a rough surface than it would be to a smooth surface. So if I'm spraying an atomized fuel down my port, why would I want the fuel to stick to the port? I want that in my cylinder as an atomized gas.
Yep.
So I believe, personally, you can put this on a flow bench all day long and tell me your flow numbers, that's fine. But when it comes to injecting fuel down that port, I really don't want to have fuel sticking to my port where I want it getting injected into the cylinder as an atomized gas. So I believe the backs of the valves should be highly polished. I believe the ports should be highly polished. the chambers should be highly polished. Everything should be polished. Look
Yeah.
at Formula One technology. Everything's polished.
And it's also highly debated.
Unbelievably.
But, yeah.
Like you say, guys who flow cylinder heads on benches all day long will tell you that they flow this and flow that. Put it into the real world application and see how it goes. Change the fuel. You know, like you might say that you flow X amount of CFM, but is that suited for the fuel that you're running in that engine?
Yeah.
What if you're running C16? What if you're running E85 or petrol? It changes everything. So regardless of what your CFM is, it's a whole thing.
I think a big part, even if people know that, you know, like a polished intake port will be better, I think the trade-off is the amount of, like if you're getting it done professionally, the amount of money it's going to cost to get it done to a mirror finish is it really going to be worth the gains? Whereas like someone like yourself, if you're doing it yourself and you're willing to put the time in, or if you're a DIYer and you want to do it yourself and you're happy to put the time in,
oh, that's it. Yeah,
it's no problem. But I think
Definitely.
that's a big factor is how much it would cost to bring it up to a mirror finish. Yeah.
So I had nothing but time when I'd done this as an apprentice.
Yeah.
I spent hours at night, after hours, when we'd shut the workshop down in a dark workshop with a tiny little lamp above me, just porting away. So and we had shitbox heads that were, you know, blow-ups from customer cars. So I port those, Volvos, and anything that came through the shop that had a big hole that went straight through the cylinder head into the camshaft area. It was just like, sweet, that's a 6-cylinder, now it's a 5-cylinder. I've got five sets of ports to port.
Yep.
So I would port them and port
practice
until you feel. But it's all about feeling the angles in the port and going, okay, that feels that feels the same. Port a little bit more here, and then you change more. Oh shit, I ported too far. That head's thrown in the bin. So it takes a long time, and you start to understand when you've done enough of these things. You start to understand what the engine wants. Sometimes you can go too big on ports, and your airspeed drops, and the motor will go backwards.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it's better to go small. This is turbo, doesn't matter. When you're force feeding air into an engine, it's all down to the compressor. Anything I do on ports and valves equates to quicker response.
And he's an idiot.
Cheers, Kate.
You're right, mate. I'll let you know.
You can let me know it.
Yep, just put that. Oh yeah, just put it down, but a little bit straighter. Yep. Good boy. You make sure you cross-thread all those fucking studs, alright? It's the only way to keep them in tight.
Cross-thread or torque to spec. Tight is tight.
Yeah, it is. Paper all through the engine, beautiful.
Nothing can hurt this engine, mate, except for a couple of rusted valves. Rust. An engine's mortal enemy.
What do you have you got plans for the actual car though? Like not just the engine, but actually doing something as the
Bodywork.
front ends.
So the car's going to get stripped. And it'll be in about 6 months' time for a roll cage and a parachute.
Yeah.
And a tail shaft hoop. At the same time, we'll probably get a diff. So we're going to upgrade the diff to 4.9 inch, and that'll get shortened down, re-splined for axles, so it'll be 114.3, like retrofit all the brakes and stuff that I want to run so it fits all my 14-inch wheels for drifting and stuff.
Yeah.
And then the bodywork, I'm going to go to a British Racing green. It's like a dark green.
Oh, like the old minis and stuff?
Yeah, minis, yeah, same colour, British green. It looks pretty mad. I think it'd suit the year of the car.
Yeah.
Obviously the engine bay is grey. And I think I want to do the interior of the boot and the interior of the car in the same grey.
Yeah, right.
When it gets painted for the inside. But realistically, I just wanted to get the car back running as a complete item, and then once it's all tuned and running and perfect, drive it for a little bit, and then when I'm happy with it, it might take a bit longer. That depends on my fabricator's time frame. If he doesn't have the time, well, I'm not going to push him. I'm not going to push him to rush it in. If I've just got to pull it apart just for him to sit on it.
Yeah. So. What about like were you gonna do flares? Are you gonna leave them as they are?
No, I was going to just try and keep the factory body. I don't really like flares.
Yeah.
I don't really want the car to have any more width.
Yeah.
It's just going to give me more drag, I guess, when I'm going down the runs.
Yeah, right.
So I try and keep it a bit more streamlined.
And you're going to
Yeah.
leave the front end the way it is? Like as in like the lights?
Sorry?
Are you going to leave it as just like the standard square headlights? You're not going to quad lights or?
No, I won't
8.6
go quad
front?
headlights and stuff like that. No, I might. I was thinking of going the diesel front end. They look pretty trick.
The what?
Like the Daihatsu Shamant front end.
Huh.
They're like that identical to a KE70,
Oh, okay.
but they're like the DX front end. It's either that or just a Madhouse lip or something on the front. Like it's going to get the whole front end put back on,
Yeah.
but it's just not a priority at the moment. It never really has been, like the bodywork.
Yeah, right.
Because if it got too pretty, you just get upset when it gets scratched and dinged and marked.
Yeah.
But that's the nature of this car. It's always been in development, always being more. So, yeah,
It's more of a tool than anything, eh?
pretty much just a learning tool for me. Alright, I'll let this sit for 5 and then I'll re-tension it. So I've just gone to 80 foot-pounds.
Yep.
I'll let it sit for 5 minutes, let it settle, and then come back and just double check. So
Well,
if
I'm
you're
getting deja vu.
Sorry?
I'm getting deja vu, man.
Oh, from your engine? Yeah. I think yours, did we let it set overnight?
Yeah, no, we set it for 15, 20 or something.
Yeah,
we
yeah,
just had
yeah.
lunch and that was
Yeah,
it.
we had lunch, yeah. Yeah, and then just come back and, double check it.
Sweet.
Gonna be mad. Once we get the cams and that in, I'll just crank it over. Yeah, go. Hold it.
Well, that'll be it for this video, guys. If you liked the video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe. And if you'd like to see part 3, where we get this little KE70 started for the first time and it actually moves under its own power, hit that notification bell. It was actually a lot more difficult than we expected. Check it out.